There are now 4.6 million self-employed people in the UK, accounting for 15% of the workforce. The rapid increase in those choosing to be their own boss has prompted the government and national organisations to pay greater attention to the cause and effect of this shift. The Royal Society of Arts is currently involved in a significant piece of research into self-employment patterns and behaviours. We spoke to Benedict Dellot, senior researcher at the RSA, to discover why so many are choosing a new way of working, the effect this may have on their lives, and the impact on the British economy. What prompted the RSA to start the research into self-employment?
The reason why the RSA is interested in self-employment is simply because it's been growing quite rapidly over the last few years. We've seen about a 30% increase in the numbers of people who are working for themselves since 2000, and that means that about 1 in 7 of the workforce are now self-employed. So what we wanted to do was try and figure out why are so many people turning to self-employment, what it means for them in terms of their financial well-being as well as their mental well-being, and what can we do to improve the living standards of people who work for themselves.
If you could just give an overview of what you found are the main reasons why people go self-employed.
There are a number of reasons why people turn to self-employment. Everybody has their own reason. I think a lot of people do it because they want greater independence, more freedom, to set their own hours, to get away from hierarchy, for example. But there are also a lot of practical benefits that we often don't pay attention to. So things like being able to care for loved ones, older parents maybe, their children, also to manage their physical and mental health conditions themselves. There is an argument that some people do turn to self-employment because they have to. And that's true for some people at least, but for most people we found they're doing it because they want to do it. And we identified 3 myths in particular through our research. The first is that most of the self-employed are forced into it. But actually, if you look at some of the survey data that's out there, what you see is that most people are doing it because they want to have greater freedom and independence. A very small proportion are doing it because they have no other opportunities for work. The second myth is that most of the newly self-employed are odd jobbers who are kind of scratching around for work. But again, if you look at the survey data, what you actually see is that the biggest increases in self-employment have been among people who work in professional occupations, in other words, the highest skilled labour groups. And then the third real myth is that this is a cyclical blip, and when the economy returns to full health, everything goes back to normal, people return to typical jobs. But what this does is it ignores the fact that self-employment has been increasing pretty much year on year since 2000, so way before the crash.
So when you've spoken to people about this, how do they view it? What are their kind of biggest concerns about their own future as self-employed people?
I think self-employed people are most concerned about what's happening in the immediate present. So their current earnings are typically lower than those in employment, those in conventional jobs. But what we're trying to do is to encourage the self-employed to think about their future in 10, 15, 20, 25 years' time, and specifically about pensions. So the self-employed, only about 30% are contributing to a pension, and that compares to about half of those in a conventional job. So there's a risk that when the self-employed actually come to their retirement age, 65, could be 70, that means that they're at risk of poverty, like people in a typical job won't be. So we're encouraging people who are self-employed to start thinking a bit about what their future scenarios might look like.
Going back to the kind of idea that self-employed people, freelancers, aren't as productive as employed people, do you think that's really true? Like, why do people think that?
The issue is that in many people's minds, small businesses are kind of characterised by the Del Boy image, where it's low-skilled, odd jobbers who are scratching around for work. But our research suggests that isn't the case. You've got a lot of highly skilled individuals who now work for themselves. And freelancers are a kind of key group. So you have people who work in IT, for example, people who work in finance, different kinds of sectors where self-employment is becoming more commonplace. And the issue is that people who work for themselves don't have access to things like training, which means they may not be able to be that productive as someone in a typical job. But I think that once we start addressing these issues and enable the self-employed to access things like training, to form networks together, cooperatives and so on, we will see productivity increase among the self-employed.
For all the latest news and advice for freelancers, contractors and small businesses, subscribe to our newsletter by clicking the link in the description. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for all the latest news and advice for freelancers, contractors, and small businesses.